Hey everyone, welcome to a new video. Just before we get started, I would ask that if you enjoy or find this content helpful, to subscribe to the channel and drop a like on the video. You'd really be helping me and the channel out a ton. One last thing is that if you have any questions, topics you'd like covered, or any areas of the game you're having trouble with, feel free to leave that down in the comments and I'd be more than happy to cover it. Now, let's jump right into the video. So today we'll be looking at another tough domain. This time it'll be the Hydro and Cryo domain at the top of Dragonspine. So similar to the Noblesse domain that I covered a couple of weeks ago, the way to beat this will come down to the comp that you run. Now, speaking of comps, you will need three things to complete this domain. One, a pyro character, preferably a main DPS. Two, Fischl as your electro character. She would be the best one. You can use another electro character like Lisa or Beidou, but Fischl would really be the best. And the third is the healer. The reason you need these characters is that one, for the healer, you will be taking a lot of damage in this domain unless you perfectly dodge everything, because as you can see here, the big hilly trail that we're fighting right now does do a lot of damage, and it is sometimes tough to dodge it. And the reason you need the main DPS as a pyro with the electro support is that the main way you're going to be beating this domain is actually through proccing overload. So as we can see here, what I'm doing now is just using Klee obviously as my main DPS, but when I drop Fischl onto the field, so her bird, so here I just alted with the bird, as soon as I bring Klee back onto the field and I start hitting him, since the Catalyst auto attacks are all pyro based, it's proccing overload. As you can see here, you're seeing the overload on the screen. It's actually knocking back the Hilichurl, which is actually stunting his damage. So the reason overload is so good in this domain is that if this Hilichurl is not able to attack you, the Cryo Abyss Mage really isn't doing much in this domain besides being a nuisance. So you're probably able to see here that I'm almost completely ignoring the Abyss Mage because besides having the slight knockback from getting hit, which is very minor compared to what the big one does, the overload damage is going to keep the main Hilichurl at bay, and then you could easily clean up the Abyss Mage afterwards. So as we can see, the overload is really what saved it there. I rarely had to dodge. I had to dodge on a couple of instances just to mitigate the damage I'm taking, but I was able to stop the mob from actually dealing a lot of its damage because it was being knocked up so often. So as we saw earlier on in the video, the key to beating this domain is to 1. Continuously abuse overload to consistently knock up the large Hilichurl. That way you could prevent them from doing damage without having to dodge so many abilities. 2. It will be to bring sufficient healing in the event that you do get hit a couple of times. Overload is very good at knocking up and preventing the Hilichurl from doing damage, but at some point in time he will attack, and if you do get hit, you'll need that healing to back you up. Now, I do realize not everyone runs 5-star damage dealers and healers, so although in the initial part of the video I was running Klee, Chi-Chi, and Jean, which are my healers and my main damage dealer, I will be presenting a couple of alternatives here. I don't necessarily have all the characters leveled up, but they will all contribute to a comp if you do build them up sufficiently that will allow you to beat the domain. So the first hunter that we're looking at here actually utilizes Jin Lang, so a polearm user, as the main DPS. Why she's good is that you can throw down her bear, which is pyro damage. Also, her alt is the Pyro Tornado, which also deals pyro damage. And then combined with the Fischl that we have there, same concept as earlier on, we'll be throwing down the bird and keeping it up at basically 100% uptime to continuously proc that overload damage. Now, Bennett is there pretty much just to support Jinlang's damage because, as we all know, Jinlang doesn't necessarily do as much damage as Klee does, but with the support of Bennett, she'll be able to deal out a lot of damage. Another plus side to Bennett is that since Jinlang does physical damage on her autos, if you have Bennett at C6, you'll then be able to have Pyro attacks. So the Pyro polearm attacks with the Bear, with the Pyro Tornado, will continuously proc off of Fischl's bird damage and then give you some consistent overload. Now, the last piece there is the healer. Barbara is a really good 4-star healer. The only thing you have to keep in mind in this domain is to never use her E because you obviously don't want to get frozen. And the only way the Cryo Abyss Mage could really affect you is if you use Eon Barbara. So just use her as an alt spam, not for anything else. Next, we'll be going to the second comp here. This one utilizes Beidou, so an Electro Claymore user, as the main DPS. So when you proc her alt, Beidou will dish out a lot of Electro damage, and then we'll be using Jinlang here, which was the previous main damage dealer, but this time as a support. We'll be using her again for the Bear and the Tornado, but then we'll be switching to Beidou as soon as we can. Next here, in the third slot, We have Bennett to support again because Beidou's damage does need to somewhat get supported, but if you find out that you're lacking in electro damage, you could always switch out Bennett for a Fischl. The last slot again is going to be filled by Barbara, the healer. Again, never use the E, just use her as alt spam, and you'll be alright with the healing. So, all that being said, that's pretty much how you do the Hydro slash Cryo Domain. When you abuse Overload and bring sufficient healing, it really isn't all that hard. It just might take a little bit of getting used to if you're running the 4-star variation. So as I mentioned, maybe mess around with either the Bennett or the Fischl in the third comp. But once you get used to it, it should be pretty easy to farm out. So with that, if you made it this far, I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video. And if you did enjoy this or find it helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you took a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if you have anything you'd like me to cover, leave it in the comments below, and I'd be happy to cover it.